Yeah.
Can you hold the microphone?
Okay.
Thank you.
So my name is Simon Pop. I'm PhD and specialized in orthomolecular medicine and heavy metals. And my questions are, when you are bringing on the market NK, so natural killer, exosomes and some...
Can you hold your microphone up so I have you?
High protein.
What was the question?
Should I repeat?
No, yes, please, repeat.
So, when you would like to bring on the market NK, so natural killer, exosomes and something against the spike proteins.
Oh. Okay. So this is about the question is about the spike protein. Okay. I'm going to have to be really careful here about what I say. Okay. Let's assume for a moment we're talking about COVID and not the vaccine, right? Not the mRNA, because I know that'll be an important differentiation. By the way, did you all see the head of research at Pfizer, that videotape that's going on, where he's saying they're genetically engineering COVID now? Yeah. Apparently this guy was in a bar, got drunk, and said, oh yeah, we're trying to mutate the virus so we can develop vaccines. That's our product strategy. Okay, anyway. Okay, so let's talk about spike protein. So when COVID first came on the scene, we started to do webinars to talk about this and give people some options. So we did 2 of them specifically, and they should still be on our YouTube channel. But at the time, what I did was look at what research was available and what was already known that could have a potential efficacious effect on COVID. And so, for example, some of the things that I recommended at the time that I would still recommend as both therapeutic and prophylactic would be vitamin D, depending on the individual, 5,000 to 10,000 IUs per day. And some medical doctors, as a treatment in cancer, will use 50,000 or 100,000 IUs per day of vitamin D. There's actually some very good research, which was done in New York, showing that taking 50,000, 100,000 IUs of vitamin D per day could put people into remission from different types of cancer. Iodine is a very well-known antiviral. I had a friend of mine that we did some work together, and he ended up getting recruited by the Department of Defense. And when I say recruited, he got a phone call and said, we're going to be there in the morning. And they landed a helicopter on his lawn, and they took him and took him out to Wright-Patterson. Because they asked him to develop an iodine-based method of treating Ebola, which he was successful at. And I had this conversation with him, and he said, oh yeah, I think we can kill any virus with this method. And what he was doing was he had a topical gel, which was made of iodine, and then he was trying to get it into a form that you could inject into the body. And then unfortunately he had an accident and he passed away, so I don't know what happened with that research. But what they were able to do successfully in the US was distribute these packets of iodine, and doctors, when they were getting people that were coming into the US that had Ebola, they would simply put the iodine all over their hands, they would put it up their nose, and they wouldn't get Ebola. It would cause, if you see it under a microscope, molecular iodine causes viruses to explode on contact. And if you look at the rates of viral infection in Japan compared to the United States, the Japanese have a diet very, very rich in iodine, as much as 10, 12 milligrams per day. Iodine is really tricky though, because it can have, of course, a negative impact on your thyroid. So before you start taking an iodine supplement, definitely speak with your doctor and find out what dose would be right for you. Doctors that I've spoken with say 1 milligram, 800 micrograms is not going to hurt anybody, but as you get up into the higher dosing, you really want to make sure that it's okay for you. But in any case, iodine, incredibly powerful. Copper is a natural antiviral. So back in Rome, they take water, let it soak in a copper bowl, and they found that the copper-infused, or the water-infused copper, had powerful disinfectant properties. Even in Rome, what they would do is they would grind copper into a powder and put it into an infection. And they would find that it would kill the bacterial infection. And actually today, what Dr. Picard and others have seen through research is that you give someone an injection of copper peptide, GHK, and the copper goes to the injury site and decreases the bacterial infection. But copper is a very, very powerful natural antiviral. And of course, there's others. I once had a meeting with, I shouldn't tell you this. Let me rephrase this in a way that's not going to get me in trouble. I once had a meeting with someone, and he used to work for a government agency, and this government agency was interested in anthrax. They were interested in an attack. And so he had been out playing golf the day before a meeting, and he threw his back out. And so when we got to the meeting, I applied patches, and he was out of pain. So he was in a better condition to tell me things that he didn't want to tell me. So I said, well, what are you guys doing these days? For an anthrax attack. And he goes, well, we put a tent around a building, and we bring these tank with these liquid chemicals. We make this chemical on site, and it's able to kill anthrax on contact. And when the residue degrades, it's completely harmless for people. But I can't tell you what it is. And I said, oh, you're using chlorine dioxide. So that's the only possible thing that it could be. So he goes, yeah, you're right, that's exactly what it is. So they get these huge tanks of sodium hypochlorite and citric acid. They have a special head where the two chemicals come together. It makes the chlorine dioxide in a few minutes, and then they spray this, let's say, into a building, and it just kills the anthrax, and it degrades into water and salt. And the same thing, by the way, happens in the human body. This is something that you can make from pool cleaner and lemon juice. You can go on the internet and see how to do it. But it's literally pool cleaner and lemon juice. You mix it together, wait 3 minutes, it turns into a dark, yellowish brown chemical. You add it to water and you drink it, and it kills viruses on contact in the body. So, in any case, we don't have time to go through all these things, but there's a ton of things that are out there to kill viruses. And according to Bill Gates, he says with a smile on his face that there's another pandemic right around the corner. So apparently we need to, be prepared for these things. So, so from my perspective, if you take the genetic engineering out of it, there are any number of natural known antivirals that are extremely powerful. We don't have time to go through all of them. Oregano oil, vitamin D, iodine, copper, chlorine dioxide. There's a whole list of things that people can do. I spoke with one doctor recently, and clinically what he found was that when a person first gets COVID, if they do a saline wash, like every hour, of molecular iodine and saline, they can be out of their COVID symptoms very, very quickly. One thing that I found, I got COVID of all things on July 4th. I went through like the whole pandemic, was totally fine. Someone came into my office with COVID, I got it July 4th weekend. And I found what was really interesting, it gave me an opportunity to do a little bit self-experimentation. I noticed when I got it that I started to get a little hypoxia. I could feel the oxygen levels coming down. And so I started to take desiccated liver and chlorophyll. And within a day, I was fine. So I talked about this on a webinar, but anyway, I think that's an interesting area of research. The desiccated liver is also really rich in copper, but it's also very high in the P450 enzyme, which activates the natural detoxification pathways in the liver. And the chlorophyll, while also being copper-bearing, can be used to elevate the oxygen levels in the cell, which is also a natural antiviral and just gets you feeling better. So that was something that I hadn't heard anybody talking about through the pandemic, was desiccated liver and chlorophyll, and I think it deserves some research. One other thing I'm going to say about COVID, sorry, I'll make this time up on the back end. We did two clinical studies. Do you guys know who Michael Jaco is? Okay, so did you see me on his podcast? Yeah. Okay, all right, so I guess I can say what I'm going to say. So I didn't really want to talk about this when we first started doing the research, but now that we completed the two studies, I feel a little bit better about doing it. So we worked with Dr. Brian Daly, and he's a medical doctor, a forensic medical examiner, and he does work for the Department of Defense. Extremely credible guy. And so we did a study with 75 people. And what we were looking to do was answer the question, if people have COVID, or if people have been vaccinated with the mRNA vaccine, is it safe to use our patches? And so because X39 is our biggest selling product, we did the study with X39. And so the conditions of the study, to make this really brief, otherwise I'll be an hour, the conditions of the study were that we took people that had gotten vaccinated, in the very first study, people had gotten vaccinated with mRNA, and we waited 4 months. Now, this was at the beginning of when the vaccines were available and there was no booster shots. That was our very first study with 15 people. Then we later went back and did a study with 60 people to see if the results were the same. So what we saw was that what is known is that when people get vaccinated, what pharma tells us is that 2 to 3 weeks after vaccination, there's an inflammatory response. And then this is what's responsible for some of the side effects. So we decided to have a washout period of 4 months. So we didn't let anybody in the study unless they had been vaccinated a minimum of 4 months prior to starting the study. And what we saw in that first group of 15 out of 15 people was that they all had elevated levels of inflammation. They all had elevated levels of fibrinogen. They all had elevated white blood cell count, and all of them, their bodies were thinking that there was an infection present, and in all of them, their white blood cells had mutated. Oh. And in some cases, you could actually see horns and a tail on those white blood cells. No, I'm being quite serious.
Yeah.
I am not.
I've heard of that.
I'm being quite serious now.
Wow.
So if you saw the original webinar we did, we showed, Dr. Daly and I showed the slides where the immune systems have mutated, where they have tails, and in some cases they have tails and a horn. So in biology, of course, anytime you change the structure of a living cell, you compromise the function of the cell. So this told us that these people that had received the vaccine were much more likely for cardiovascular disease and autoimmune disorders. We repeated the study with 60 people and essentially found the same thing. So that's the bad news. The good news is that if these people have been educated and told to take certain antioxidants like glutathione, take NAC, take your vitamin D, you can get the inflammatory response under control. But of course, no one was told that. All right, I've said enough.